This is a story of how a land shapes people and how, over many years, a few people in turn come to be the keepers of the land. It is a story of cows and horses and cowboys. Cowboys who were the Indians, of wild and distant windswept lands, of kings and commoners, and people who learned to live with the primal forces of nature. In country unlike anything in the American West, surging surf on beaches of black sand, treacherous lava rock, dense rainforest, vertical cliffs of crumbling rock, and all punctuated by volcanic eruptions and the occasional tidal wave.
Belina mai ne ekipa mai kauhale ne keia manawa ka avale ke roa a mai ne. E ka muolelo. E muolelo kaula no ka Paniolo. E no ka muolelo. The story of the Paniolo, the Hawaiian cowboy, is all but missing from the history of the American West. It begins 200 years ago, in a time when the word cowboy did not yet exist. A time when young men of Indian and Spanish blood, vaqueros from the great haciendas of Mexican California, made their way to these islands to teach another native people, the Hawaiians, how to ride and round up cattle. So the first cowboys weren't the characters we've grown up with in the movies. In fact, my great-great-grandfather was a vaquero of Mexico, and we knew him only as Hoki Paniolo, Hawaiian for Spanish Jose. So, no laila, hiki o ke launa pume o ko, le kei mo olero. Apehe hiki mai ka pipi, I Hawaii ni mamua. Let us share with you the story of how cattle and the first cowboy came to be.
Over 1,000 years ago, Polynesian voyagers read the stars and waves to find their way to these isolated islands. While British Captain James Cook is credited with the discovery of the Hawaiian Islands in 1778, there is evidence that the Spanish were here 200 years earlier, a link that would reappear and leave enduring marks on life in Hawaii. Ancient chants make reference to Aya Kamakaniu, those with the eyes of the coconut late and green. But the word of Cook's discovery attracted other explorers and traders to Hawaii, eager to add sandalwood to the furs they were trading in China. Inevitably, these outsiders brought gifts, and a few years later, in 1793, British Captain George Vancouver arrived from Monterey, California, with a few Mexican longhorn cattle, and presented them to Hawaii's ruler, King Kamehameha the Great.
According to the custom of the country, we saluted by touching noses. I had on board 5 cows, 2 ewes, and a ram. Such an importation could not fail, being highly beneficial not only to the residents, but to all future visitors.
Some double canoes came off to us in the forenoon, in one of which was the only surviving bull. Kamehameha asked many pertinent questions about the manner of treating them and the advantages likely to be derived from their increase on the island.
Hawaiians call them pua'apepiauhau, pigs with iron ears. Kamehameha placed a kapu or taboo on the killing of cattle, allowing them to multiply and run wild. It was a decision that would influence land use and shape the economy of 19th century Hawaii and its trade with the Americas. For good or evil, imports would change the natural environment drastically. Don Francisco de Paula Marin brought oranges, figs, grapes, roses, and other tropical fruits from Mexico. 10 years later, in 1803, Captain Cleveland brought the first horse.
The great king, Kamehameha, remarked that he could not perceive that their ability to carry a man quickly from one place to another would be compensation for the great amount of food they would require. One could only hope that time and experience convinced the stolid chieftain of their possible services in the work of civilization.
Along the rugged forested highlands and volcanic shorelines, upland dwellers and Hawaiian riders set out in search of dangerous game.
Wild cattle are numerous in the mountains, so wild and ferocious that the natives are afraid to go near them.
Cattle go wild and are not allowed to be shot without permission from King Kamehameha.
Bulls make great destruction among sugar canes and gardens, breaking into them and tearing them to pieces.
By the time Christian missionaries began arriving around 1820, the legacy of Kamehameha the Great included a surprisingly brisk trade in foreign goods. To support the buying sprees of some of the ruling chiefs, the common people were forced to harvest the fragrant sandalwood, carrying logs for miles from the upland rainforest to trading ships at the seashore. As Prime Minister for the boy King Kamehameha III, the royal regent Ka'ahumanu saw that the sandalwood trade was destroying Hawaii's forests as well as her people. She proclaimed the cutting of sandalwood kapu forbidden under penalty of death. But some chiefs had developed insatiable appetites for foreign luxuries. Although there was little sandalwood left to trade, they continued their buying sprees, and their personal debts mounted to about 1.7 million in today's dollars. On May 11, 1826, the first U.S. Navy ship entered Hawaiian waters to enforce the settlement of debts. Payment to the foreign merchants fell upon the commoners in the kingdom. Every adult was obligated to pay in tapamats, Mexican silver, or piculs of sandalwood. With sandalwood all but gone, the answer lay in cattle. Wild longhorns and sheep had multiplied to rather amazing numbers. Many of the rock walls we see today were built by Hawaiians to protect their fields and homes from the devastation of wild cattle. Over the next 40 years, as hundreds of whaling ships poured into the islands for provisions, demand for salt beef, pipikauda, soared. Well before most of the American West ever saw a cowpoke or a herd of cattle, Hawaii had become cattle country.
The wall I have my hands upon, it was built in the time of King Kamehameha the Great to retain cattle that were given him as a gift by Captain Vancouver. They were allowed to multiply. Many got out into the upland forests, starting a wild herd. Very wild. They had to be roped by men on horseback. They would be tied to a tree overnight to soften their necks. Then they'd be either led out the next day, or else they would be pinned to an oxen, and the oxen would bring the animal down. These men were cagey people. They were strong, and they were basically fearless. You hear that song, Ho Makau Kaui Kauleili, or Ko Hinapu, or Hikinoa. Hinapu means your horse could go head over heels. They didn't care. That was the type of individual they were. Very brave.
There are immense herds. They employ foreigners to shoot and salt the meat. They first carry all the salt to the mountains. When they have killed the animals, the flesh is cut off their bones, salted, and put in small barrels brought to the shore for the purpose of provisioning.
We found these half-naked foreigners, 2 Europeans killing wild cattle, one a Welshman, the other a Prussian blacksmith.
Our white men are coming to shoot cattle in Waimea. The first man is a blacksmith. He will do the shooting, and the second is a cooper. The cattle I got from the king.
Jacques est le meilleur cavalier de ses îles. Jacques is the best rider in the islands, the most fearless hunter of wild cattle. At 10, he sailed as a cabin boy. At 20, he was shipwrecked on the coast of Hawaii, and there he remained. He's not alone in this kind of existence. There are many like him who hire out their rifles to exploit the wild cattle. À l'exploitation des troupeaux sauvages.
Today, the keepers of Hawaii's Paniolo tradition can still be found in one of the oldest tackles in America, on the sweeping slopes of Mauna Kea.
Adios, adios, que aloha. days of yore. Being a cowboy, that was pure love. You had to be. Otherwise, that was hard work. That was hard. And, when they were roping those wild cattle, that was hard. We just got to look at it this way, that those were the days of iron men and wooden ships.
Yeah, this I think is about the last saddle house on Park Ranch compared to all the other places. 150 years, I think.
This was really cared for.
Yeah. Today we just come and go. Their days they ride horses. They come and they leave up here. Today, no, as soon as 8 hours or whatever, in Pauhana, you down the road on a car. No, when I came was here. Calvin, yeah. Mahamua. We poured concrete here. I say we saved this because it's one of the last. But you look over there now, it's all pipe. That's the way they want it. But I said, no. We keep the old way. We keep the old way. Twice older than me. I say, like Pitaka. Papa over there is what, over 90? Just one spring chicken. Every day, you know, hey, this thing is very precious. Right. That's how I started. And if I leave or whatever happened with me, hey, that's Paniolo right there.
Right, that thing was there.
Was there, and then you respect.
Right.
Maintain, you sweep, clean. Nah.
By 1830, the king and his advisors realized that chasing down wild cattle was not only dangerous, but grossly inefficient. The answer to their problem came from across the sea, from the rich heritage of Mexican California, taught by Franciscan priests on mission ranches, came the vaqueros.
Era una extraña mezcla de razas. It was a strange mixture of races, the blood of caballeros, bullfighters, Jews, Moors, and Indian heroes ran in his veins. If food was short, he fed his horse before he fed his wife. Chilled to the bone, he would ride from dawn to dusk. But there was a sky overhead, wild flowers that spread like a purple carpet, and it chased down the mountainside in the fall, when the air is like wine and life is good.
One of the early sandalwood traders, Captain George Beckley, also had a ranch in Veracruz, Mexico. After arriving in 1806, he became a close advisor to King Kamehameha the Great and married the Hawaiian chiefess Ahia, a woman renowned for her beauty and Spanish dress. Their son, William Malulani, was trained at the Beckley Ranch in Mexico and returned to become Konahiki of Waimea and manager of all the king's cattle. William employed some of the finest Mexican vaqueros, eventually establishing his own ranch in Waimea, which he called Little Mexico. After learning the vaquero trade in Monterrey, 23-year-old Joaquin Armas sailed in 1831 aboard the ship Harriet. When Hawaii's music-loving young king met the ship to hear its 2 fiddle players, he discovered Armas, a skilled vaquero. Kamehameha persuaded Armas to stay at the royal residence. While nearby 2,000 people labored to build a lava rock wall that would separate Honolulu from cattle roaming the hills beyond. The wall was 6 feet high and 1.5 miles long, stretching across the slopes of Punch Bowl to Makiki, then turning seaward at the mouth of the Manoa Valley. Bullock catchers drove herds of cattle and pigs through the streets of Honolulu to Skinner's Wharf, where rows of slaughterhouses lined the waterfront, and hundreds of ships arrived annually to purchase fresh provisions. But lucrative sales of beef, hides, and tallow still could not keep up with demand for salt beef, pipicola. More vaqueros were needed.
Honolulu, August 19, 1833. I have no cash on hand to pay Captain Henry, but the largest outstanding debt is the amount due me from the king, now about $3,500. Spaniards have been employed about a month in Hawaii, catching bullocks, and thus far have succeeded very well and are now obtaining hides and tallow for the Lima market.
A bright fire was blazing in a cavity in the earthen floor, displaying the dark features of natives gathered around it. A group of fine-looking men were all attired in the poncho, an oblong blanket of brilliant colors having a hole in the middle, through which is thrust the wearer's head. The pantaloons are open from the knee downward, with a row of dashing gilt buttons down the seam. A pair of boots, armed with long spurs, completed their costume. They are bullock hunters, just returned from an expedition of 10 days.
Others came from Chile and Peru, some fleeing severe drought, others seeking political asylum, but foreigners who married Hawaiian women after 1840 were required to take an oath of allegiance to the Kingdom of Hawaii. Many were Catholic, a religion that was kapu'o forbidden. Hispanic names became Hawaiian: Juan, Juan, Jose, Joque, Joaquin, Joaquini, Octavio, Octavio.
We got our training from the vaqueros. And many, many years later, almost 50 years later in the American West, the vaqueros taught them how to work cattle too. Hawaiian cowboys are some of the oldest cowboys in the United States. Texas came 50 years after the Hawaiian cowboys. I have some ancestors that come from Mexico, and they were Ramon. They came as vaqueros.
My tutus, they went mostly with wild cattle before because never had brain. And they used to dry the hide after the skin. And then they cut them in strips in 4, 6, or 8, and they start to braid, and they call this kaula'ili. We preserve our kaula'ili.
There was no nylon rope, see, and we have to use kaula'ili.
We translate it in English, cow fat, ape aila. We take it from the rear part, the flank part of the animal.
When you come cowboy, the kaula'ili is very important for cowboys. It's very hard to make one kaula'ili. We used to take good care of them. Even nights we have them in our bedrooms. And you live in a cellar room like this, you have to hang where the rat don't get in.
Mamua o ko loa koko, is Paniolo, pao me mako. Grandma said before you tutus came, Grandpa them one no haru, kanu, uala, palai, pumpkin and potato, and the Grandma them used to kawale. Kawale just means ride bareback. Kauliu ho. Them the one we teach Grandpa them how to ride. Yeah. That's how she told me. She knew her grand-aunties was Spanish. Actually, our great-grandmas was the one who introduced kawale like ride horses bareback.
Unfortunately, very little is known of the Mexicans that did come to teach the Hawaiian because at that time they were not record keepers, you know. All their stories and their lore was preserved by word of mouth. Nothing written down.
Yes. Grandma, she olelo to me, so she talked to me.
There's quite a great amount of Spanish influence in the songs of the monarchy period, 19th century. The monarchy was very much aware of the Spanish and Mexican heritage. Liliuokalani included Spanish words in her texts. The cowboy tradition also did this, and one of the very famous songs was Adios que Aloha by Prince Leleo Hoku. The idea of slack key, that is open tunings for guitar, was something that was found already both in Spain and in Mexico. Vaqueros came from the Veracruz area, which is famous for falsetto singing. Spanish influence extended also to a way of playing the instrument, that is, an open tuning for guitar. The distinctive musical styles of the Veracruz tradition, harp and singing.
Ted, how do you do your tuning to Slacky?
Hey, Uncle Steve. Every old hammer got their own tune.
That's a secret,
Every form of work has its own vocabulary, and now these Hawaiians wasted no time in inventing theirs. Tradition holds that the word Paniolo comes from Paneola, which comes from Hispaniola, meaning Spain or Spanish related. Others say it derives from the Spanish panuelo, or handkerchief, something the Mexican cowboys often wore around their necks. Others believe the name comes directly from the Hawaiian language.
To us who lived this life of ranching, the word means ha, to hold firmly, and niolu, to sway gracefully like a branch from the solid trunk of a tree.
Hawaiians called it ho'ohui pipi, to round up cattle, and soon Mexican carts were carrying thousands of hides, barrels of salt meat, lumber, food, and rum. Long before the indigenous peoples of America's West had lost their lands and lives in the Indian Wars, native Hawaiians had suffered tragic losses from imported diseases. The king's cattle roamed the highlands, and commerce was reshaping many of the old ways away from the ecologically balanced ahupua, the traditional Hawaiian land unit, which extended from the mountaintops to the sea. Centuries-old aquaculture and irrigation work were becoming a thing of the past. Even the mulberry plant used to make the tapa cloth was no longer being cultivated. Instead, it was replaced by calico, or cotton calico fabric, brought by the missionaries. It was a time when waves of revolution swept across Western Europe. America was adding new states, and the great American West faced a war with Mexico, then found itself caught up in a gold rush. Meanwhile, commerce between Latin America and Hawaii escalated. Spanish-American gold and silver coins were the common form of exchange in the Hawaiian kingdom. To replace moldy flour that arrived from Boston, thousands of barrels of Chilean flour were traded for Hawaiian cowhides. In later years, Hawaiian sugarcane would supply Peru with cuttings to begin its sugar industry. Cattle trade continued to link the island kingdom to the world, as demand from 600 ships a year was transforming traditional Hawaii into a cattleman's dream. The slopes of Mauna Kea were dotted with 10,000 cattle, and the harbor below at Kauai High was a small village with a few sparse coconut trees lining the shore. But in 1 year, 50 ships docked for provisions and carried off 1,500 barrels of salt beef at $12 per barrel, sweet potatoes, pork, beans, hides, goatskins, tallow, 22,000 pounds of wool. Entrepreneurs like William French saw great promise in open lands of the island. With the king's permission, French formed a ranch and trading business, employing former bullock hunters John Palmer Parker and Jack Purdy. Business boomed, but the monarch controlled the land and the cattle. More and more Western mercantilists wanted their own property rights, their own land, their own cattle. Hawaiians did not have a concept of private property in the Western sense. Land was Papahanaumoku, Mother Earth, Kumuhonua, Kumuipo, Hawaii, Hawaii, Hawaii Kainano. The idea that it could be bought and sold was the antithesis to Hawaiian thinking. Foreigners pressured the king to change the system to one more like Western real estate. And in 1845, an event called the Great Mahele. Mahele means division. The Hawaiian monarchy established a system of private property. The majority of land went to the kings and his chiefs. The commoners received about 26,000 acres. A Western economy of imported and exported goods began to replace the traditional way of life Hawaiians had taken from the land and the sea. It was believed the Great Mahele would allow the Maka'ainana, the commoners, to own their own land. But instead of them returning to their taro farms, the Mahele left native people dispossessed of the very key to their culture, their land, the Aina. It was a loss from which the native Hawaiians have yet to recover. Without land, Hawaiians migrated to the towns, and non-Hawaiians with money formed large tracts of privately owned land. Foreigners married Hawaiian women with dowries of a few acres. Others purchased, traded, or received land grants from the monarchy. Private ranches were formed, some of which still exist today. John Palmer Parker turned his wife's lands into Parker Ranch, which would become one of the largest privately owned ranches in America.
Waimea, an elevated country where snow and soft winds from the sea convert cold vapors into refreshing showers. Mrs. Kenway was the first I met of the mixed races. I have seldom met a lady possessed of more natural refinement. Englishmen came to welcome me to the mountains. These gentlemen were not young. Like most earlier European inhabitants, many years settled in these islands, they were sailors who had forsaken the sea for the easier life on shore. Some Chileans among them, from whom they learned the use of the lasso, and are now very expert.
Meanwhile, battles for California's independence led many California merchants to send their wives and children to Hawaii for safety. Other merchants like French, Janion, Green, Lusana, and Brewer began companies, some of which still exist today.
Hawaiian bulls have been shipped from Honolulu to China in hopes Hawaiian cattle may be exported to other countries.
The Friend, July 1st, 1843. 10,686 hides were exported at $2 each. Manley Hopkins reports that this year, sales were 577,341 pounds of hides, 252 barrels of beef, 716 calf skins, 104 head of cattle. 10,686 hides were exported at $2 each. The whole of these plains were covered with a thick wood. Now, hardly a tree is seen for miles, almost entirely affected.
Trade winds bring clouds as to suggest the fate of Pompeii, parched earth and dust blowing day after day. I have empty quarts of it from my bed cover at night. It pours in so thickly that in minutes it is impossible to distinguish the color of the furniture.
Dear Mr. Richards, can nothing be done to prevent wild cattle being led through our streets? We can never send a child on an errand, our females are afraid to walk, and men cannot go safely. Cattle break loose and sweep the streets at their pleasure. No place is safe. I hope you will bring the matter before the rulers.
Long before tourism became the dominant influence in Hawaii's economy, the cattle trade was shaping Hawaii's economy and environment. In 1859, oil was discovered in Pennsylvania, and the need for whale oil disappeared as it was replaced with Pennsylvania crude. The number of whaling vessels calling in Hawaii dropped sharply. With it went the demand for beef and other provisions. By the time the Civil War began, sugar exports began to soar, for now the North was cut off from sugar of the Confederacy. When 32 ships of the whaling fleet were lost in an early Arctic freeze in 1871, whaling in Hawaii was dead, but the days of cattle and the Paniolo were far from over.
They are a strange race, these natives, amazingly unselfish and hospitable. To the wayfarer who visits, they freely offer their horses, food, and beds. If a Kanaka who has starved 2 days gets a hold of $1, he will spend it for poi, and then bring his friends to help him devour it. Horses are plentiful everywhere here in the Sandwich Islands. No Kanaka is without one.
As one chapter in Hawaiian history was closing, another was about to begin.
The imported cowboys have now disappeared, and in their place has sprung up a class of equally as skillful Hawaiian mountaineers.
I ho'okahi pauku o ka molelo Hawaii e ho'opauan ai ka mea e ho'omakana ho.
Ranju, what may make you come, cowboy?
Well, when I was young, I always loved horses. My dad he was a trainer, and in my life, as my dad, I like to be like him. I always like to be like him. He taught me the whole ropes right up till I was 15. I worked for the ranch. He put me into the ranch, so they made me polo trainer, train polo ponies. My dad was my boss.
When I studied on the ranch, working at Breaking Bad, young horses take a mauka, or maka is in the forest or down to the ocean. Throw them in the salt water, then swim out. Yeah? That's big help for their hoof. Yeah.
One thing in the ocean, they cannot buck you off, they cannot kick you. Because the water, they cannot kick in the ocean, so when you get them in the ocean, give them all the works. You gave them the works.
That's why Hawaiians train in the ocean?
Yeah.
Not only in the ocean, we used to go up in the swamps like that.
Got good terrains, and yet we got rough terrain, different.
Ranches you go to, you know the lava flow? Oh, is the smooth one. Okay, is the sharp ones.
In my lifestyle, horses get killed. I mean, I've seen lolos, you know, guys are on their hand, they think they know how.
Yeah.
They come out, they rope, they don't really look, they just go blind. They think they see an arena. Hey boy, get out of trees, boy.
In the arena is different. Outside open country, it's different.
Yeah, so different cowboy world.
Right,
yeah. If we are Paniolo, you gotta really get up and do that. Where you going? What terrain? What are you gonna do?
On the morning of March 27, 1868, bright light was observed on Mauna Loa, which proved to be the beginning of the most disastrous outbreak, which defies description and has no parallel in the memory, the history, or traditions of the Hawaiian Islands.
On that afternoon, Mr. Harbottle was driving cattle across the hill, when suddenly the earth shook and a great detonation was heard behind him.
Horses and cattle turned round involuntarily. The atmosphere was red and black. We saw a burst from the mountain. An avalanche of red earth rushed down, swallowing up everything in its way. Trees, houses, cattle, horses, goats, and men.
There was no escape. The torrent of earth shaken by the volcanic convulsion instantaneously buried a village with inhabitants and 600 head of cattle.
The fright of men and animals, scenes of terror I've never witnessed before. Streams ran mud, the streets cracked open, an occurrence as much out of character in Hilo as it would be in New York. More than 300 shocks were counted, nearly every stone wall and house demolished in an instant.
I was going cross lots with my father to visit Lyman's tannery when the ground began to heave. All the horses and dogs were running Malka.
Immediately after, an immense tidal wave swept the coast, destroyed much property, a number of lives.
Last came the most spectacular of all phenomena. A shower of ashes and pumice covered many miles. Then the flow of lava from Mauna Loa.
By now, the Hawaiian kingdom had transformed itself into a constitutional monarchy.